A Dutch resistance fighter crouches in a barn outside Arnhem, the winter of 1944 settling into the walls around him. He has heard Allied transport aircraft passing over at night for months, dropping cheap submachine guns stamped out of sheet steel so men like him can keep fighting while the front stalls along the river. Word has reached him that a German patrol pulled one of those weapons off a captured courier last week. The same stubby tube, the same side-mounted magazine, the same British markings. He assumes it was simply one more Sten gun that never reached its intended hands. He has no way of knowing the weapon the Germans are now carrying was never dropped from an aircraft at all. It was built in a German factory on purpose to look exactly like his. That weapon was called Gerät Potsdam, and it was never meant to be recognized as German. It was built to be mistaken, on sight, in the dark, in a soldier's hands, for the enemy's own gun. By the autumn of 1944, Germany's war economy was buckling. Steel was scarce, skilled machinists were being pulled into infantry units, and factories that once turned out precision-made rifles were being bombed into rubble faster than they could be rebuilt. At the same time, German ordnance officers kept running into a stubborn irony. Royal Air Force aircraft were dropping thousands of British Sten submachine guns across occupied Europe for resistance fighters, and a meaningful number never reached partisan hands at all, landing in the wrong fields or getting swept up by German patrols first. Officers examining those captured guns kept reaching the same uncomfortable conclusion. The enemy's cheapest, ugliest weapon was also one of the most efficient firearms ever put into mass production, built almost entirely from stamped sheet metal, needing minimal machining and almost no skilled labor. With factories running out of everything except desperation, that simplicity looked less like an enemy's weapon and more like a lifeline. In the fall of 1944, the German army placed a contract with the Mauser works to do something that sounds almost absurd on paper: reproduce the British Sten gun exactly, down to its markings, using German tooling and German labor. Mauser's engineers drew up two sets of production plans, one for large-scale factory assembly and a second so small machine shops with minimal equipment could turn out completed guns, a hedge against the Allied bombing, knocking out Germany's larger plants. The finished weapon was given the German designation Maschinenpistole 749, followed by the letter for English in official paperwork, the standard label Germany used for captured or copied foreign equipment. Mauser's copies were close enough that only a trained eye would catch the difference: a folded and welded magazine housing and barrel shroud in place of some machined fittings, and a 6-groove rifled barrel where the British version used a different pattern. Everything else, down to the stamped lettering, was built to pass as a genuine captured British weapon. If you're enjoying this, a subscribe helps. Now back to what happened once nearly 10,000 of these fake British guns actually left the factory floor. Production moved fast, with roughly 10,000 completed guns accepted into German service across November and December of 1944 alone. What those guns were actually issued to remains one of the stranger open questions in the story. Some researchers who have studied the program believe a portion was meant for German guerrilla operatives, quite possibly fighters tied to the Werwolf resistance program. Germany was quietly organizing for its own occupied territory, men who might plausibly need a weapon that would not immediately identify them as German soldiers. Others point to conventional militia units absorbing whatever weapons reached them, regardless of origin. No confirmed combat record for Gerät Potsdam has ever surfaced. No after-action report describing disguised Sten copies fired at Allied soldiers, which leaves the guns in an unusual position, built with real industrial effort behind them, whose actual field use nobody has ever definitively documented. Set the numbers next to each other, and the program looks less like clever imitation and more like a portrait of an economy running on fumes. A genuine British Sten cost the United Kingdom roughly $10 American to produce, a submachine gun so simple it could be issued by the tens of millions without straining a wartime budget. Germany's supposedly identical copy came out of Mauser's line costing roughly 1,800 Reichsmarks per unit, several $100s at wartime exchange rates, a staggering markup for a weapon meant to be humble and inexpensive. Copying simplicity was not simple once it ran through a supply chain starved of raw material, fuel, and transport. And that gap is one of the clearest snapshots of how badly the German war economy had broken down by the winter of 1944. A common assumption about Gerät Potsdam treats it as a slick piece of wartime espionage, a false flag weapon engineered specifically to trick Allied soldiers into believing German troops were friendly resistance fighters. The truth is messier than that. Surviving records never spell out one single confirmed operational purpose for the weapon, and the guerrilla infiltration theory remains a plausible reading of thin evidence rather than a settled fact. What is confirmed is simpler and, in its own way, more revealing that a state built around the idea of German industrial superiority had reached the point where copying its enemy's cheapest weapon, marking included, looked like a reasonable use of its remaining factories. Mauser was already moving past the design before the contract even finished. A follow-on weapon called Gerät Neumünster stripped the concept down further, welding the magazine well directly onto the receiver tube, deleting the barrel shroud and permanently fixing the trigger, cutting assembly time to roughly a single man-hour per gun. Intended for the Volkssturm, the militia Germany scraped together from teenagers and elderly men in the war's final months. Roughly 5,000 were built before the surrender, and fewer than half of those, under 2,500, ever reached the militiamen they were built for before the war ended in May of 1945. Back in that Dutch barn, the resistance fighter never learns how close he came to standing beside his own weapon's twin, without either side realizing what they were looking at. What Mauser's engineers built into Gerät Potsdam was never meant to win the war on its own, and by the winter it was made, nothing could have. It was meant to keep a collapsing army armed for a few more months, using the cheapest, most efficient design available,